We want to go to the asylum crisis, as tens of thousands of migrants that are living in New York City shelters could soon be told to leave.
This new 60-day limit will apply to roughly 30,000 parents as well as children.
So just 2 months ago, some of those 30,000 families got their 60-day move-out notices, and in just a week or so, they're gonna have to leave. And the reason they've got to go is because the shelter system is full. But as this is happening, we're learning that there are gang members living in some of these very same facilities. Which means as the first families are moving out, people facing criminal charges for things like assault and robbery will still get a place to stay.
Chaos and a heavy police presence at the migrant shelter on Randall's Island. Detectives say it started as a fight and escalated. A 25-year-old was taken to a hospital and 2 men were taken into custody.
The violent Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, or TDA, has hundreds of associates citywide. Not only are they citywide, but they are operating inside the city's migrant shelters, like this one behind me.
This gang is made up of asylum seekers being housed at the Roosevelt Hotel. They're a subset of the gang Tren de Aragua.
This is the Manhattan hotel that's been dubbed a modern-day Ellis Island. It's a temporary shelter for many of the 200,000 migrants who've come to New York over the past 2 years, including Emily and her children.
A lot of people on one side, and then on the other side, people, they were running, says this man, a migrant from Ecuador who lives at the shelter.
The gang is recruiting new members inside the shelters, and it's smuggling guns inside the shelters, inside food cartons.
So as gang members start moving into our shelter system, the legitimate asylum seekers who live there are worrying about their safety. But what nobody's talking about is that a shelter system that becomes dangerous isn't gonna benefit anybody except violent criminals who shouldn't be living down the hall from families with small kids. And what's worse is because our shelter system works on a first-in, first-out basis, some of those families will end up getting evicted, while a small number of bad actors continue stopping these shelters from actually helping the majority of the 65,000 well-meaning asylum seekers who still live in them. And the reason people have to move out is so that new folks can move in, but if a small number of gang members are in our shelters now and are allowed to stay, not only will their presence in the shelter take up bed space that could be used by a family, but logically, if they're here now, in the future they'll just be replaced by somebody else who doesn't have any intention of living the American dream, but is instead only here to help a gang expand its criminal empire while recruiting new members. And to top it all off, New York is a sanctuary city, which means people who our federal government is looking for may either be on their way here or here right now, as our shelter systems don't do background checks to avoid placing a potential wanted fugitive down the hall from little kids who are in elementary school, essentially making our shelters bases for the kinds of criminal activity that affect the entire city while exploiting law-abiding asylum seekers and destroying their futures. And that brings us to the real reason why having gang members living in shelters down the hall from families is a bad idea. Their mere presence in a facility that's supposed to help people stops it from doing that. And that's exactly what's happening, as these places are now being used as bases for criminal activity by gangs who, as you're about to see, are recruiting young, vulnerable asylum seekers and teenagers to join their ranks and commit robberies and assaults. And remember, New York is a sanctuary city, which means police, they're not even allowed inside these places to patrol them and keep people safe, which makes them completely unsafe. So here we are at the Roosevelt Hotel. It is a massive 1,000-room facility which serves as not only a shelter for asylum seeker families, but also the welcome center for every single new arrival who comes to New York and needs a shelter placement. But the problem is, it's recently come out that gang members have taken up residence here. Yet since this facility is at capacity and there are new arrivals coming to New York every single day who need a place to stay, the city has to make room for them. But instead of moving the gang members who might be on a federal watch list out of here, since this is a sanctuary city, everybody moves out 60 days after they moved in, no questions asked.
This new 60-day limit will apply to roughly 30,000 parents as well as children who are currently in shelters all throughout New York City. But again, the city is once again reassuring these families that they are not just kicking them out and saying, hey, get out of here, but they say that they are working with them.
So as you can see, the city has a plan to help people move move out of this place, and they understand how nerve-wracking it's got to be for a family with little kids who just got here to be displaced, and they're trying to reassure people that everything's going to be fine. But if you ask the families who live inside the shelter, things here are not fine at all, and there are other people who should probably be moved out before them. And as you're about to see, right now you've got legitimate asylum seeker families who could really benefit from housing, yet now they've got to move out because their 60-day time limit has expired. And inside this facility right now, you've got moms, dads, families who came here to seek a better life, yet that's not what they're finding. They may even have kids in school. They may even be on the cusp of getting established. But now their lives are getting flipped completely upside down just so new people can move in and then have an identical experience. Here's a direct quote from one of the moms who was interviewed, who's a resident here. She says that TikTok is full of stories about some of the kids in this hotel. Why can't they be arrested or sent back? This is only going to get worse. Can you imagine being a parent in a place like this, trying to raise your kids, worrying about what's going to happen to them? Especially when down the hall from where you might be staying, we've got these guys who are a group of 20 different people who've been arrested about 50 times for committing crimes out in Times Square. Yet even after being arrested and charged with very serious crimes, they're still allowed to come back here at the end of every day and plan whatever it is that they're going to do next. Yet for some reason, committing a crime does not factor in at all to one's potential move-out schedule from a facility like this. Everyone moves out based on when they moved in. That's just how it works.
Immigration advocates say, though, this change does little to help these families and will leave them scrambling to find new places to stay. The concern being school. The new school year is just...
Yeah, it's not doing anything to help them, but it could probably do more to help the people who have to move out if instead of freeing up bed space by kicking people out, bed space was freed up by making the place more safe at the exact same time by asking people who've been in jail or the back of a police car recently to live somewhere else. And it's not just gang members living in this facility in particular that people are worried about. Gangs are actually a pervasive problem throughout our entire shelter system. And some are now saying it's an urgent matter of public safety for Mayor Adams to get the gang members removed from these places as soon as possible. And what that means is this right here is not the only facility in town where there are people in it right now who are trying to use it the way that it's supposed to be used to benefit their lives, who have to leave, while other people who aren't trying to use it for that purpose get to stay. And the parents living in places like this are very confused. Here they are in America, of all places, after fleeing crime and poverty that was brought about by gang violence, and here they are living in a shelter in the middle of Manhattan, and the same criminals that destroyed their home countries are in here waiting for them. And it's not that these gangs are just living here because it's a free place to stay. Yes, it is that. Yes, they can use it as a base to commit crime. This is a sanctuary city. Police are not allowed inside, but they're also recruiting new members. And where do you find new members? Well, you find them in the shelter, unfortunately. And these parents are absolutely terrified that their children could get sucked into the criminal underworld or could join these gangs, or worse, commit crimes in a new country where they're trying to get a fresh start, which is ridiculous. But here we are, a big progressive city with a progressive justice system and a right to shelter, and we're not doing background checks on any of the people that get placed in these facilities, which means that when someone moves in, the city has no idea whether or not it's safe to have that person living next to little kids. They're just moving people in and seeing what happens. If no one calls the cops on them or they don't wind up in jail, I guess they're not a threat, right? Now look, this is America after all, and we do have a rule that says everyone is innocent until proven guilty, but there's no effort being made on the part of the city to separate people from this facility, which has children living inside it, and possibly place them in another place where they can be under greater potential supervision. Nope, none of that. Which means when bad things happen, and those bad things might be all over the news, nothing is being done to make this place safer or to improve it for the people who could benefit from it yet are only here for a limited amount of time to begin with. But the next problem facing these families who could soon be homeless living on the street is actually even worse.
It's a temporary shelter for many of the 200,000 migrants who've come to New York over the past 2 years. Emily was a civil engineer in Venezuela, but violence and instability forced her to flee. Her husband has gone ahead to Ohio.
So here we have a mom who's got kids and she's married and she has prior experience as a civil engineer. Her husband has actually left the shelter to go look for work in other states. They're trying to move out, but living here puts her in a very precarious position because these gang members, even if you don't owe them them some sort of debt for crossing into the country with their help at the southern border, they're still sizing up every single person who walks in to look at what their value could potentially be from a human capital perspective. Young male asylum seekers are reportedly coerced into joining these gangs under threats and intimidation, with some of them even being told that their family members at home will be in trouble if they don't join the gang. And sadly, others are left so homeless and jobless by our shelter system that after they're moved out of the shelter, the only place they can find to stay is in a tent down by the river. Literally, this is happening, and those are places where a gang member can go and just knock on the door of a tent and say, hey, do you want a better future? I've got one for you. And just the thought that we've got mothers with young kids living in places like this, I don't want to imagine what possible plans gang members could have for innocent people like that. But probably the most ridiculous thing about all of this is how easy of a problem crime in a city-funded shelter would be to solve and get rid of, yet nobody wants to even consider this as a solution. But it's so simple. You just need a law and order presence inside of this place. That would get rid of the criminal element right away. Criminals don't like to operate in the daytime. They don't like to operate when law enforcement's watching them and looking at them and monitoring them. But we won't do that in our shelter. You don't have any police presence at these facilities. You do have hired security guards who are here to work the metal detectors and maintain some semblance of control over this facility. But how much control do they really have when armed gang members are frequenting this place on a regular basis? And take a look at just how far away the closest police presence is. Right over here is the front door, and then you got to walk all the way around the corner here to find the nearest police car. This is as close as they're allowed to get on the next street corner over. And what's really a shame is the police, they can't even go in this facility without a warrant for a specific individual. They can't even go in for a general safety concern or to do like a wellness check. Nope, they've got to have a specific purpose, looking for a specific person. And what that does is it pretty much guarantees that the only folks inside this facility with the ability to maintain law and order are going to be the gang members. It's their code of ethics that gets enforced in this place, and that's bad news, not just for the people living in here, but for everyone in this city. So our police, they've really got their work cut out for them, not just because this is a sanctuary city with lax laws that release people who commit crimes against others. No, that's always been a problem here. But the new problem is because now we've essentially got gangs hiding in plain sight inside massive facilities that the police can't go near at all, which gives these criminals just another tool to help them commit crime, which isn't what we need right now. And now, since these gangs are taking advantage of other asylum seekers, police now need to be on the lookout for people that need to be rescued from these operations. And if you thought our police were overworked before this crisis began, it's even worse now, unfortunately.
But they are operating inside the city's migrant shelters, like this one behind me. The gang is not only recruiting new members inside the shelters, it's smuggling guns inside the shelters, inside food cartons. Now, what makes this gang...
So think of what it's got to be like to be one of New York's asylum seekers living in one of these facilities, knowing that the police cannot do anything to keep you safe. Of course, living in a dangerous environment wasn't at all what you had in mind when you came here and got off a bus, perhaps at the Port Authority, and made your way over to the Roosevelt Hotel to check into a shelter. Yet from the moment that you get there, gang members who might have already encountered you in some form on your way into the country are there waiting for you. And remember, there's nothing the police can do about this because those gang members are allowed to live there and the police aren't allowed to go inside and stop them. And when you think about it, the asylum crisis is the perfect opportunity for the wrong people to try and exploit if it's not well managed. Because sadly, many of the folks coming into America do so with the help of smugglers who may get them across the border in an unofficial manner. Apparently, this is a very expensive process and not everyone has the resources to pay what it costs in full. So what happens? These smugglers tell folks that they can work off their debts later after they're successfully in the country. And since those smugglers are in league with some of the very same criminals who are now living in our shelter systems and aren't afraid of the police one bit, they're sadly able to find people months after they may have parted ways. It's terrible. And sadly, this wouldn't be possible at all if these gangs weren't able to operate with near certain impunity all over our city. But it's happening because we're a sanctuary city, and that's actually stopping many of the people who that status is supposed to benefit from achieving anything once they get here. But sadly, it does help the gang members who come here looking to disappear to go and do so because, again, sanctuary city.
What makes this gang particularly dangerous is a few things. One, this is a gang that's full of members that are really unknown to the NYPD and to much of U.S. law enforcement. The other thing that makes them particularly dangerous, this is a gang that is not only citywide, but it runs the gamut as to the types of crimes that they specialize in, the NYPD.
So this gang, this Tren de Aragua, apparently all the crimes that they specialize in revolve around human smuggling in some way. And that's a problem because the asylum crisis is a humanitarian crisis. It's all about people, and so is this gang. And that's why it's so terrifying that we've got gang members camped out in places that are supposed to help people, because gang members don't help people. But by allowing them in our shelter system, they're essentially presented with a revolving door of potential recruits and other potential victims on a regular basis. How in the world is allowing something like that to go on going to do anything to alleviate what is this large humanitarian crisis? How is this going to make the lives of any asylum seekers better? It's not going to. It can't. The two are incompatible. Gang members and safety. There's no way those work together. And what that means is we don't really have a shelter system in this city that rehabilitates people. No, we have places where people live where they just get into some of the same exact problems that they fled in many cases. And in order to clear those places up to make room for new people to come in and get the same kind of help, we're going to evict families and let some of the criminals stay because they haven't been there as long. What kind of system is that? Is that a good system, or is that a system that is just making this entire crisis worse than it ever needed to be? What do you think about that? Should police be allowed inside of our shelters to keep families safe? Is law enforcement and immigration, are those two things mutually exclusive? Do they cancel each other out like some people believe, or does law enforcement have a way to help people who are vulnerable? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.